One of the best ways to cut down on grocery costs while still eating real, nourishing food is by making things from scratch. Fermenting, pickling, and preserving pantry staples at home isn't just budget friendly, it also adds gut-healthy probiotics and deep, rich flavors to your meal. And it's actually a lot easier than it may seem and not as scary. Today I'm showing you how I make homemade apple cider vinegar, kombucha, sauerkraut, pickled onions, and fermented garlic honey. All simple, affordable, and packed with nutrients. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. The first recipe of the day is apple cider vinegar. I've only made this once before, so this is my second attempt at doing it. I've been saving all my apple cores for the past couple months. We went apple picking in the fall, so we had a bunch of lovely fresh apples, and anytime I ate one or cut one up for Mackay, we just popped the core right into the freezer along with some peels I had because Mackay had a hard time eating the peels when he was a bit younger. And I filled my mason jar with the apple cores, and then I also had a couple apples that were at the point where they kind of needed to be eaten. And then the recipe I followed recommended if you were using peel or apple cores to use some fresh apples in there. So I was just chopping up this apple here. Actually, I think I had 3 of them and added those to the jar as well. I ended up making 2 jars worth because I had a lot of peels and a lot of cores, so I needed 2 large jars for that. And for the recipe, as always, I'll link all the recipes I'm showing in today's video down below. For all these recipes, I'm not using my own, but rather other people's that are more experts in the area. And I just wanted to mention, because I was using frozen apple scraps, I did let them thaw before I proceeded with the recipe. And also, if you're using full apples, you're going to want to make sure that you wash the skins really well, because the apple skins can hold pesticides, and usually apple skins, if you don't pick them, the apples yourself, actually have a layer of wax on it. So go ahead and wash them well before cutting them up and adding them to your mason jars. And there's no need to de-seed or anything like that. The seeds, yes, they do contain cyanide, but it's such a small amount, and you're only actually fermenting the mixture with the apples in it for 2 to 3 weeks, and then you strain the apples out, so it really isn't in there long enough to have any negative effect. After your apples are all chopped and ready to go and in the mason jar, next it's time to make the liquid that is going to submerge your apple mixture. So for this, it's actually super simple. It's just water and sugar. So you're going to want to measure out roughly 1 tablespoon of sugar per 1 cup of water used. And the amount that you're going to need really depends on how much apples you cut up and how big your mason jar is. I used roughly 4 cups of water for each of the mason jars. So I did 8 cups of water to 8 tablespoons of sugar, but the amount will depend on how big your mason jar is. And the water I used was just a little bit warm, not too much, because you don't want it hot, but when it's a little bit warm, it does help dissolve the sugar. And then if you want, at this point, you could add apple cider vinegar if you have it, because this can actually help jumpstart the fermentation. Although it's not necessary, but it can help, especially during this cold time of the year, but I didn't have any on hand, so I didn't do that. Once the apples, water, and sugar are all combined, cover your container with a breathable material. I use these cloth wipes that my mom helped me make, which I'll link the tutorial down below, but you can really use anything on hand, although I recommend something a little bit thicker like this so flies and bugs can't get into it, because you don't want that to happen, because that will ruin it. And then go ahead and secure it with an elastic and then put it in a dark location for about 2 weeks, stirring it daily. I choose just to put it in my cupboard because it's easy for me to access, and then it's also a little bit higher, so it's away from dust and things like that. And when you stir the mixture every day for the first 2 weeks, make sure you're using a clean spoon just to prevent bacteria growth and mold. If you miss a day, it's not a big deal, but try to be consistent, especially in the first week. During this time, the apples will brown and the liquid will turn cloudy, and you may see bubbles and a cider-like smell. A yellowish white sediment on the bottom is normal, but any fuzzy green or raised white mold is not. Use your judgment and just keep an eye on it. After your 2 to 3 weeks are done, it's time to strain the apple mixture, so it's pretty self-explanatory. Just put a fine mesh strainer on a measuring cup or bowl and then pour the liquid into that while you capture the apples, and then pour it back into a mason jar, a clean one that is, and then cover it the same way as before with the cloth, with the elastic, and put it back into a dark, cool place to let it ferment. And this can really take as little or as long as you want. Usually you want it to ferment at least a month. The longer you ferment it, usually the more acidic it becomes because the bacteria is eating up the sugar. Now we are on to making kombucha. Unlike the last recipe, this is one that I've been making for years and years and years now, probably roughly 5 years if I had to put a number on it. And so therefore I made this countless of times, many times. And the resource I always go back to for making kombucha is the website Live Eat Learn. She has a thorough step-by-step guide on how to make kombucha, and essentially you have to break it down to 3 steps: making the SCOBY, the first fermentation, and second fermentation. So right now I am just making the SCOBY. The SCOBY is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast and is the mother of kombucha, providing bacteria and yeast to ferment the sweet tea and protecting the tea from outside contaminants. So to make the SCOBY, you'll need a couple things. You'll need sugar, water, black tea, and 1 cup of unpasteurized, unflavored store-bought kombucha. However, these days, finding unflavored store-bought kombucha is unheard of, which is really funny because it used to be the most common one. So I don't know why that is. So if you can't find it at the store, you can either A, look on Facebook Marketplace for someone selling the SCOBY with the tea, which is kind of a win-win, then you can skip this part. Or B, just use something with a gentle flavor, maybe like a ginger, not something like strawberry lime kombucha, but just with the one flavor. So making the SCOBY is actually pretty easy. So you're just going to want to bring 7 cups of water to a boil and then add 4 bags of black tea or 1 tablespoon of loose tea and just let this simmer for 15 minutes. Remove the tea and then stir in a 1/2 cup of white sugar, and you're going to want to leave this to let it cool down to room temperature because kombucha and the SCOBY is live bacteria. If you add the hot tea to the cup of the kombucha, you will kill the bacteria and you will not grow a SCOBY. And then add it into a mason jar along with 1 cup of your kombucha, cover it with a cloth and an elastic, and then put it into a cool, dark place and let it do its thing for 4 weeks. Now we are about to time travel. Actually more than 4 weeks have passed because mom life, but let's just say 4 weeks have passed and it's time to do the first fermentation. So what you're going to need for this is 14 cups of water, 1 cup of sugar, 8 bags of black tea, 2 cups of unflavored kombucha, and then your SCOBY. However, the large mason jar that I usually use for this, I was boiling it to clean it because that is very important, because if not, you'll grow mold in your kombucha, which you do not want. I was boiling it to sterilize it and it broke. The bottom of it broke off. Even though I was measuring the proportions out for this, I actually ended up just doing half because I just had the 1 SCOBY and then a smaller mason jar. What you're going to want to do is similar to making the SCOBY. First, you're going to want to make your tea. So bring the water to a boil and then add your tea in it and let it steep for, again, 15 minutes. Remove the tea, stir in your sugar, and let it cool. And then once it's cooled, put it in with your SCOBY, add your kombucha, and then you're going to let it, again, do its thing, ferment for this time only around 6 to 10 days. After the 6 days, you can taste it. The longer that you let it ferment, the less sweet it's going to be because the bacteria eats up the sugar. So even though you're adding in all that sugar, it really doesn't have that high of a sugar content in the end. So if you like your kombucha less sweet, then you let it ferment longer versus if you want it more sweet. And then also to take into consideration is where you live. I'm in Canada. It's cold right here, right now, so it will ferment slower. Therefore, I'll probably leave it for the 10 days versus if you live in summers like Hawaii or Mexico, it will be warmer and it will ferment quicker, so therefore you might leave it for less, like 6 days. And once you're done with the first fermentation, this is when you can move on to the second fermentation. This adds carbonation, and at this point you can also add flavor. In the past I've done ginger, lime, lemon. So for this step, all you're going to do is strain your kombucha into bottles and add your flavoring in at this point as well. But I do want to warn you, if you're using the flip top bottles, I've used those in the past, and the ones I got were off of Facebook Marketplace. They were like old beer bottles that someone put the flip tops on, because I got 30 of them for like $2. However, I don't know if it was because I put too much kombucha in it, or the bottles were just so old and the person was using them for homemade beer that they just had no life left in them. But I had a couple explode and glass went everywhere. So this is your warning that if you're filling them up with the flip top bottles, just make sure you leave enough room in at the top that you don't put any liquid in. So therefore, if the gas builds up, it's not going to explode like mine. Learn from my lesson so you don't experience it yourself, because it's not fun cleaning up glass and kombucha everywhere. In fact, actually, it happened to me twice, and the second time, the one explosion set off all the bottles to explode. So that's just a little tip, is to don't fill your bottles up to the top with kombucha, but leave a couple inches of just air. Okay, next on the list of fermentations to make is sauerkraut. This is one I used to make all the time, but ever since having Mackay, I haven't made it, and I don't know why, because it's one of the easiest fermentations to make. It's so tasty, it's great for your gut, it's great for a little side dish, and if you don't know, Kai is half German, and although sauerkraut doesn't originate from Germany, it's a essential dish there. And the best part, it's super cheap to make. All you literally need is two things: salt and cabbage. And this cabbage I think I got for $1.96, something like that. And the salt I just had in my cupboard for ages, but we all know salt is not expensive. I use sea salt, but you could also use kosher salt or whatever you have in hand. So I just started off by dicing up the cabbage. If you had a food processor, this would be a lot easier. We did have one, but Kai broke it by trying to make pizza dough in it. Thanks, Kai. And my knife is very dull, so this was not fun. I did try the tip that you guys recommended, sharpening it on a ceramic cup. It seemed to kind of work, but I just don't know if my knife is just very bad quality and that's why it's still dull, or if I just didn't do it right. If you want, you can take out the core. I know in most recipes people recommend taking it out, but you can use it. Like, I typically use it in the recipe. Sometimes I take it out and just make it into a salad because it is a little coarser, but it doesn't really do any harm keeping it in. And then if you want, you could add other things like beets or carrots. I've used those in the past. Today, I'm just keeping it simple and just doing sauerkraut and the salt. So for every 1 medium head of cabbage, you're going to want to use 1.5 tablespoons of salt. And I forgot to mention too, at the start, I peeled off the first layer of the cabbage leaves. This just avoids, any dirt or pesticides. And then I peeled off one clean layer to kind of put that on top later, which you'll see. So once you add the salt, you're going to want to massage it really well in there. I did this for 10 minutes roughly. This just helps draw out the liquid, which you'll need the liquid to submerge the cabbage to avoid it from going moldy. After the salt is all massaged in and you can see the liquid kind of gathering in the bottom, grab a clean mason jar. Make sure, again, this is very important, that it is clean, that you boiled it and killed off all bacteria. Grab handfuls of the cabbage and pack them into the canning jar. Tamp down the cabbage in the jar with your fist. It might seem when you first put it in that you can't fit a lot into it, but when you pack it down, it condenses a lot and you can fit a lot more. And this also helps get the liquid out because, like I said, we need the liquid to cover it up. And then once all your cabbage is in, you're going to want to hit it down with a wooden spoon. You can use either end of it, and this is called muddling, and this will help the liquid submerge and cover the cabbage. And once I had all my cabbage in there and the liquid covering the cabbage, I added in the layer that I talked about before of the clean cabbage leaf to just help cover it up, because I was going to put like DIY mason jar weights in, because I don't have mason jar weights myself. I just filled up these mini mason jars with water, but I didn't really want that directly touching the sauerkraut, so I put the leaf on and then put that on as the weight. And what this just does, it helps ensure that the cabbage or the sauerkraut stays submerged under the liquid to prevent molding. And then along with the other fermentation recipes, I covered it with a cloth and secured it with a rubber band. This again helps it breathe and helps it ferment while preventing bugs and debris to go into it. And for now, I'm just storing it in a dark, cool place, so in my cupboard where I put the rest of my fermentations. And over the next 24 hours, what you're going to want to do is press down on the cabbage every so often. Cabbage will release more liquid and the liquid will rise over the top of the cabbage. And then after the first day, this won't necessarily have to be done, but do keep an eye on it daily just to make sure that everything is still submerged to prevent molding or it going bad. And then for the cabbage, you can let it ferment from anywhere from 3 to 10 days. This really depends on taste preference. So after the 3 days, you can just put a little fork in there, grab some out. Again, make sure everything is clean and then taste test it. And if you like the taste of it, then what you can do is take your lid to the mason jar, put it on there and put it in the fridge, and this just kind of stops it from fermenting. If you don't like the taste of it, then you can let it ferment longer. Okay, now on to the next recipe. This isn't a fermentation, but a pickled thing. Pickled onions. I make this one all the time, and again, this is one I've been making for years and years and years because it is so easy and so tasty. I love to add it onto salads, pizzas, sandwiches, anything, soups, curries. Like, I literally add this stuff on anything. And I think I mentioned in my last video that my dad gave us a bunch of red onions because he bought a huge bag of them that literally had like 40 red onions, but I think they were so cheap because they were starting to go soft, so pickling it just kind of preserves it. All I did was cut up a bunch of red onions into slivers, and then I put it into a mason jar and made my liquid. So for the liquid, you're going to need, well, depending on how much you make, but I added 3 cups of white vinegar, 3 cups of water, 1/3 cup of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of salt. You're going to want to just cook this on the stove until everything is dissolved and it is warm. Pour it on top of your onions, let it cool, put it in the fridge, and that is literally it. Most recipes you find online says that they only keep for 1 to 2 weeks. In my personal experience, I find that they last a lot longer than that in the fridge, up to a couple months, but use your own discretion. If you think it's going bad, it smells funny, throw them out. If they've been in the fridge for a month or two and they look fine to you and you taste it, it tastes fine, keep it. And I also want to mention, if you're looking at saving money or, things are tight, save your peelings for all your onions, garlic, carrots, things like that, and then you can make it into a veggie broth, or even if you just want to keep your onion peels, you can make that into onion powder. Same with garlic peels, you can make that into garlic powder. I have a recipe coming soon on making homemade veggie stock with peelings, but it's so easy. It's basically free to make, and it adds a lot of flavor to your dishes. And last but not least, we're making fermented garlic honey. This is another super easy one to make, so if you're just starting off in the fermentation world, I recommend this. It's also a natural medicine, so if you're wanting to start off in that world as well, this is a great recipe. You can use it for coughs, colds, sore throat. We always have a jar of this on hand, but I think it's important to mention that children under 1 cannot have this just because of the risk of botulism. So if you do make this, don't feed this to your baby. Today I am making just a small batch to give to my mom because she wants to try it out. You can either take it by the spoonful when you have a sore throat, you can take a little bit daily for a preventative measure, or you could also add it into things like homemade barbecue sauce or salad dressing. Right here I'm just poking holes in my garlic. This helps ferment it. After this, you're simply just just going to want to put it in a jar and then fill it with honey. It's important to use raw, unpasteurized honey. Raw honey, first of all, has more health benefits, and it's also preferred because it retains natural enzymes and beneficial microorganisms, which are crucial for the fermentation process and contributes to the overall health benefits of the final product. Raw honey is an antibacterial and antifungal and strong in antioxidants, and usually you can get local honey for a decent price. I have a huge jar that we got for only $10 at our local's farmers market. It's best to buy local when you can because A, it can be cheaper, it's good to support the local economy, and specifically for things like honey and veggies. Local honey contains pollen from local plants, which can help desensitize individuals to local allergens, potentially reducing allergy symptoms. Every day or so, tighten the lid on the jar and flip it upside down to coat the garlic cloves with honey. Loosen the lid again when you return it to the upright position. This is burping, and this just prevents any explosion from the fermentation gas building up. Within a few days to a week, you should see small bubbles start to form on the surface of the honey. The honey garlic will ferment for about a month, but you can eat it at any time. The flavor will continue to develop over time, and the garlic will mellow, and the honey will become much runnier. Store it in a cool, dark place for months and months and months, and up to a year, if not even longer. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.